I got used to being invisible. I walked through the hallways like part of the furniture, an old bench, a janitor's cart, a piece of the floor. No one saw me. Or, if they did, they preferred to pretend they didn't. I'd been the janitor at that school for almost 10 years, and still, no one knew my name. Some called me sir, others just hey. Most of the time, I was just the mop guy. My name is Jorge, but you'll only understand who I really am at the end of this story. I started working there out of necessity, not passion. I was a single father. My wife had died in a car accident when our son was just 3. I gave up everything I had, my engineering degree, my plans, my dreams. I took what was left and went searching for stability. The school offered a steady paycheck, health insurance, and, most importantly, hours that allowed me to be with my son on weekends. But inside those hallways, I was treated like I'd given up on life. Students laughed when I passed. Some, bolder than others, would drop things on purpose just to see me bend over. One time, they spilled juice right after I had cleaned the floor, and one of them shouted, "Hey janitor, you missed a spot." The group laughed. They always laughed, but it wasn't just the students. Teachers passed me by without saying good morning. Some used the staff lounge as if I weren't even there, tossing papers on the floor, leaving food scraps in the sink. A coordinator once let it slip. People, like him, are just here to obey. I didn't let it get to me. I smiled. I cleaned. I stayed later than I had to and came back earlier than I should. It became a silent game. If I couldn't be seen, at least I wouldn't be forgotten for the wrong reasons. My son, Lucas, was the opposite of me. Bright, outgoing, full of ideas. He studied at another school, a much humbler one, but he always said he wanted to create a place where no one was treated like trash. He didn't know what I went through. Maybe he suspected, but I made sure to protect his view of the world. At home, he called me his hero. At school, they called me useless. Over time, I developed the habit of observing. I was invisible, remember? So I used that to my advantage. I knew which students used drugs in the bathroom. I knew which teachers talked behind each other's backs. I knew which parents threatened the principal with money. I saw everything, and I heard things, too. That's how I overheard the conversation. That changed everything. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was cleaning the second-floor hallway when I stopped near the administration office. The door was slightly ajar. "We need a private investor." "Fast," said a voice I recognized as the coordinator's. "The school's going under. We can't let this leak," the principal replied. "Parents will pull their kids out. But the truth is, we're broke." That hit me like thunder. Broke. I went home with my head spinning. I stayed up all night, and as the sun rose, a sick idea started to make sense. The following week, I asked for a day off. I went straight to the bank, where I had an old, almost forgotten account. There were the savings of a lifetime. Money I'd been quietly putting aside since my wife died. Small investments. A few rundown properties I'd inherited and never sold. Some dusty bonds. And even a bit of cryptocurrency my brother had convinced me to buy years ago. The total was surprising, and for the first time, I saw a way out. In the days that followed, I spoke to a lawyer, then to a financial advisor. I met with a group of private investors, and then I went back to work. As if nothing had changed. No one noticed. Of course, they didn't. I was still the mop guy, except for one student. A senior girl named Melissa. She was different. Wore big glasses, kept her hair in a messy bun, always had a book in hand. One day, while I was cleaning the library, she asked me, "Why do you work here?" I stopped. It wasn't common for anyone to ask that, because I need to take care of my son, I replied. She gave a sad sort of smile. "You're more respectful than any teacher here." It was the only time in years I felt seen. That night I made a decision. It was time to turn the page. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted silent justice, and justice, sometimes, can be bought. I did everything quietly. While I kept up my routine of mopping hallways and emptying trash cans, my lawyers were negotiating in silence. Despite its financial struggles, the school still had a strong reputation in the state. It was known for its tradition and for attracting kids from influential families. That's why the bankruptcy news was being guarded like a national secret. But I knew, and more importantly, I acted before anyone else could. On paper, the school was a company with majority shares held between two owners, the principal and a silent investor who wanted out. My lawyer reached out to that investor, offering a fast and discreet exit. We made the offer through an educational holding company I partnered with, so my name wouldn't appear right away. The deal closed in 2 weeks. That gave me 49% of the school, just 2% short of control. And that's when things got even more interesting. I kept going to work every day. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., drop my son off at his public school, and head to my invisible shift. The difference now was, when I walked past the administrative hallway, I knew I partially owned the place. I knew the floor I mopped was, in a way, mine. One morning, the principal passed me and said, without even looking, "Watch the corners. They're starting to look grimy." I paused for a second, almost smiled, but kept mopping. The second partner. The principal was a man named Armando Diaz, a familiar name among local politicians. The kind of guy who looked like he was born wearing a suit. Always polite, with people he thought were above him. With me, he was indifferent. Not even openly rude, just erased my existence like a coffee stain on his schedule. He had no idea that, in a few weeks, he'd be sitting across the table from me. But life has perfect timing. On a random Tuesday, I was called into a meeting room. I found it strange. One of the secretaries saw me waiting and chuckled. "Did they call you?" "To clean the room, Jorge." But not this time. I walked in and found 2 men in suits sitting at the table. I introduced myself calmly, and one of them shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Jorge, a pleasure. As of today, I'm your business partner." The principal walked in moments later, still unaware, and what followed looked almost like a scene from a movie. The lawyers explained that the sale of the school's shares had been finalized, and that the Gamma Educational Group now held majority ownership and decision-making power. Then they revealed that I was one of the owners behind the holding. The principal looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Is this a joke?" he asked. "No, it's a reorganization," I answered. That morning, for the first time, my name was placed on the institution's administrative board. And still, no one beyond that room knew. I didn't want exposure. I wanted time. I was planning everything with patience. The next morning, I went back to cleaning the halls, like nothing had happened. But something had changed. In their eyes. Some staff started looking at me differently. They knew something was up, but not exactly what. Rumors started spreading like wildfire through the halls. A teacher mumbled during coffee break, "I heard the school's being sold. Hopefully they get rid of that arrogant principal." I said nothing, kept cleaning, observing, preparing. That's when I started talking more to Melissa, the bookish girl. She always stayed late in the library, reading until the sun dipped behind the dusty windows. One day, she called me over and showed me something she'd written for the school paper. It was about invisibility, about how some people were treated like shadows in the hallways. "I thought about you when I wrote it," she said, with a raw honesty that cut deep. That night, I took the article home, read it, then read it again, with tears in my eyes. It felt like someone had translated my soul into words. And that's when I understood. I didn't just want to buy the school. I wanted to transform it. The changes started subtly. I invested in small upgrades, fixing the bathrooms, new lighting, reorganizing the library. All done under the name of the holding company, of course. Officially, external investments. But The power structure was still intact. The principal, even without majority control, still pulled the strings behind the scenes, treated staff with disdain, students with condescension, and parents with fake smiles. A politician disguised as an educator. I needed more. One final move, and fate delivered it. On a hot afternoon, during a parent meeting, the principal made an unforgivable mistake. A mother complained that her daughter had been humiliated by a teacher and visibly irritated. He replied, "Maybe. Your daughter should learn not to act like a bus station maid." The comment dropped like poison. Several parents protested, but he didn't back down. That week, the story leaked to the local press. Headlines popped up, and social media exploded. Gamma Educational seized the moment. We called for an emergency board meeting, with a vote to remove the principal. And so, at a table he once thought he controlled, Armando was dismissed. The next day, I entered the principal's office for the first time, not in a janitor's uniform, but wearing a light gray suit I had ironed myself. I knocked on the door, opened it, and sat down, for the first time, in a place where I was never allowed to be. Even after taking over as principal, I didn't make any speeches. Most people didn't even know I was behind the change. From the outside, it just looked like a normal administrative shift, one of those moves that only matters to people at the top. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Quiet, discreet. I still took the subway to work. I still dropped off my son at school at 7:20 in the morning, with a rushed kiss and the little thermos bottle he insisted on carrying. His uniform was ironed by me, his lunch packed by me, and my life, at its core, was still the same. But every step I took inside that school carried a new weight. I remember clearly my first day in the principal's office. The chair was too big, the desk cold and formal. It was almost symbolic. There I was, sitting where I was once invisible, where they once saw me as part of the floor. I inherited a toxic environment. The staff was fragile. The students, they no longer respected anyone. Authority had collapsed. The walls breathed arrogance, neglect, and vanity. Instead of imposing rules, I began by observing. I talked to every staff member from the cafeteria lady to the oldest teacher. I asked each one how they felt working there. I heard stories of harassment, veiled jokes, and silent contempt. One security guard told me that he had once been stopped from using the teacher's restroom so as not to disturb anyone. That hurt more than anything else. Inside those walls, there were layers of invisible humiliation, and for years, no one did a thing. I did. I didn't shout. I didn't announce any revolutions. But soon, the small things began to change. My first act was simple. I remodeled the staff lounge. I installed a proper coffee machine, new lockers, a comfortable armchair, and a sign on the door. This space belongs to everyone. Smiles started to show up there. Then I restructured the scholarship system. Many of the most arrogant students were children of politicians, entrepreneurs, or judges. They walked around like the world revolved around them. I started opening space for public school students with excellent grades and powerful stories. That changed the atmosphere. Some parents started to complain. I received threatening emails. One of them wrote, "Is this school turning into a charity center?" I replied with a single line, "This school is turning into a center of character." Meanwhile, the old students began to sense that things were shifting. That group of boys who used to laugh at me while I mopped the hallways started giving me cautious looks. One of them, the loudest, passed by me in the cafeteria and said, "The new principal is weird. Never shows up at assemblies." I smiled softly. They still didn't know who I was, and that was my advantage. I didn't want them to change because of fear. I wanted the system itself to force them to confront themselves. But masks fall. Eventually, it was on a Friday afternoon, after a student theater performance, that everything started to surface. Melissa, The bookish girl had written the play. It was an adaptation of a story about invisibility. I was sitting in the back of the auditorium, watching. The play was emotional. At one point, the main character said, "Being ignored every day doesn't kill you, but it erodes you." I looked around. Many parents seemed uncomfortable. Some teachers were visibly moved. At the end, there was timid applause, but Melissa walked over to me, hugged me discreetly, and whispered, "The story was about you." I froze. She knew, and in that moment, a chill ran down my spine. I had built everything with silence, with strategy. But there, standing before a teenage girl, with honest eyes, I realized I couldn't hide anymore. On Monday, one of the popular students, the same one who used to mock me, was called into the office. He had cheated on an exam, and the teacher had filed a formal complaint with evidence. He walked into my office with a smug smile, sat down without asking, "So you're the new principal? You gonna give me a lecture?" I looked him in the eyes, leaned forward. "Do you remember me?" He frowned, confused. "No, I was the janitor who cleaned the floors while you spilled food and laughed with your friends." His face turned pale, his words disappeared. "Now, I'm the one responsible for enforcing the rules you always thought were beneath you." He tried to laugh nervously, but couldn't. For the first time, maybe, he felt the weight of responsibility. Not because of my position, but because of his reflection. Reality began to set in across the school. Slowly, one by one, students and staff realized that the invisible man had become the mirror no one wanted to face. And I still hadn't even started the most important part. From the moment I began showing that change was real, I realized my biggest challenge wasn't overcoming the students' arrogance or renovating the school's physical structure. It was breaking the silence of those who felt invisible, who carried hidden wounds beneath the surface in that school. Every hallway held secrets never spoken aloud. Teachers who gave up teaching because the system crushed them. Students wearing masks to hide fear and sadness. Staff smiling on the outside but crying inside. I didn't want to be just the principal who punished or gave orders. I wanted to be the one who listened, who saw the unspoken pains, who understood that sometimes silence is a suffocated scream. So, I began organizing weekly meetings for staff and students who wanted to share their stories. Over time, those gatherings became the school's beating heart. People started opening up, revealing their struggles, and finding strength in shared empathy. I remember one night in particular when Anna, an English teacher who had recently suffered a loss, poured out how alone and unmotivated she felt. The entire room fell silent, and I realized it wasn't just her. Many carried similar invisible pains. I made sure to be there, showing that, in that space, at least, there were no judgments, only humanity. But, of course, not everyone liked this new approach. Some former board members, still wielding backstage influence, began covert opposition, spreading rumors and trying to undermine my authority. It was a silent war, fought away from the eyes of students and most teachers. But I didn't back down. Every attack, every distrust, only strengthened my conviction that I was on the right path. At the same time, I kept investing in infrastructure, making sure every improvement was felt daily by students and staff. I installed new computers, renovated bathrooms, improved the library, and even created a small community garden, where anyone could care for plants and find moments of peace. The school's transformation was made of small gestures that together created a new culture of respect and welcome, and little by little, even the toughest students began to change. They saw that it was no longer acceptable to belittle or humiliate, that the king of the hallway could just as well be a teacher, a staff member, or even a peer they once ignored. The turning point came when one of the most popular students, the very one who used to mock me in the past, came to my office, hesitant. It was a strange moment. He spoke, stammering, about his struggles at home. the weight of family expectations, and how school was the only place where he truly felt challenged to be better. We talked for hours, and for the first time, I realized that this transformation wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. That boy, who once scorned me, was beginning to understand the value of respect and humility, and I, despite everything, felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride for the overcoming, sadness for all that was lost along the way, for the pain many carried alone. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs, but never, ever would I stop fighting, because, in the end, that school was more than a building, or a name. It was a reflection of society, and I had to prove that, even in invisibility, the strength of a man can change everything. I didn't want revenge. I truly didn't. I simply wanted to prove, quietly, that people like me, those who were overlooked, laughed at, and treated as invisible, are capable of more than anyone expects. By the time I returned to that city, I was no longer the janitor. I was now the owner of a growing educational startup that provided infrastructure and digital platforms to dozens of schools. The result of years of study, night shifts, and investments made in silence. I had learned to navigate the system, not as a pawn but as someone who had built the board from scratch. My entrance wasn't dramatic. No luxury car, no suit, just me and my usual discretion. I arrived for the meeting with the school board with a clear purpose, to present the acquisition proposal. The school was in a financial crisis, poor management, outdated methods, and the arrogance of those who never adapted. That arrogance was what would deliver the school to me on a silver platter. When I walked into the conference room, I saw some familiar faces. One of them was Diego's mother, the same woman who once said that a janitor should stay in his place. Now she was the one sitting with lowered eyes as I began the presentation. I explained, with professionalism and calm, how my company would not only invest in the school, but also modernize it entirely, bringing in new technologies, training programs for teachers, and full renovation of the infrastructure. There was silence in the room, a heavy silence. No one dared interrupt me. No jokes this time. No, "Hey, aren't you the janitor?" That time had passed. The deal was approved in less than 2 weeks, and for the first time in my life, I held the keys not to a broom closet, but to an entire institution that once humiliated me. I didn't fire anyone out of spite. I kept the janitors, the cleaning staff, even some teachers who remembered me and had treated me with respect. The rest were replaced. I wasn't seeking revenge, but karma has its own subtle elegance. What was most ironic was seeing Diego's face again. He now worked in the city, at a small marketing agency. He hadn't achieved the brilliance he once bragged about. One afternoon, he showed up at the school to pick up his younger sister. When he saw me leaving the director's office, with a badge around my neck and staff greeting me with respect, his smile froze halfway. I greeted him with a nod, nothing more. That nod carried decades of silence, effort, pain, and transformation. He tried to talk, to pretend it was all water under the bridge, that we were equals now, but something in his eyes trembled when he realized he wasn't facing the same man. He was facing the man who had risen from the floor he once mopped. That's when I understood. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge speeches. My presence, my growth, my silence, they were my loudest answer. After taking control of the school, the feeling that overwhelmed me was complex, a strange mixture of satisfaction, responsibility, and, above all, a deep desire for silent justice. I didn't want to be just the owner of the building, or a mere manager. I wanted to restore dignity to that institution, not only within its walls, but in the people who made it up. The very people who, for so long, saw the school as a place of humiliation and exclusion. Just as I had experienced, the first months were arduous. I had to rebuild trust among teachers, staff, students, and especially the community. Many looked at me with suspicion, questioning my intentions. After all, how could a former janitor lead a traditional school? It was a question I felt in everyone's gaze, but it didn't need to be spoken aloud. I implemented a program focused on human development, providing psychological support for students and staff. I renovated the facilities with my own resources, prioritizing spaces for socializing and learning, such as libraries, computer labs, and recreational areas. Technology became permanent, with digital platforms that facilitated access to knowledge. But the greatest transformation was cultural. I made sure to create spaces where every voice could be heard, not just those who always had privileges, but those who were marginalized, just like I once was. One day, I received an unexpected visit. It was Diego. The same boy who humiliated me, who spilled coffee on the floor so I would clean it, stood there, hesitant. He apologized not just with words, but with a gaze heavy with regret. He confessed that the school's change and my attitude made him reflect on his own arrogance. That was the true victory, not owning the school, nor perfect management, but changing hearts, hardened by vanity and pride. I began to hear stories of students who, before I arrived, were on the verge of dropping out, but now felt welcomed and motivated. I remember Maria, a young single mother who found vital support at the school to continue her education. She once told me, with tears in her eyes, that I had changed her perception of herself, that it was possible to overcome adversity. My heart filled with pride, but also humility. I knew that legacy was not mine alone, but belonged to all who believed in second chances. Karma, for me, wasn't explicit revenge, but subtle justice, where those who underestimated me had to accept my rise and the transformation I led. Today, East Hollow School is no longer just an old building with stories of humiliation. It is a symbol of overcoming, inclusion, and hope. And I, the one who was once ignored, am here to prove that true power is not in the title one carries, but in the strength to rewrite one's own story.